It's 6 p.m. on a Tuesday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let us begin with the headline makers. President Park Geunhye and lawmakers pay tribute to those who sacrificed their lives more than half a century ago on this day that commemorates the first democratic uprising in Korean history. After its monthly monetary policy meeting, the Bank of Korea reaches a conclusion, lowered growth outlook. Also, the central bank demonstrates caution when it comes to the key rate, leaving it at 1.5%. Vice foreign ministers of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan meet for talks in Seoul today. Discussions center around North Korea, amid signs the regime will carry out a fifth nuke test anytime soon. It's April 19th here in Korea. It is when Koreans remember the nation's first ever democratic uprising against the government that took place back in the year 1960. Park Geunhye starts us off by taking a look at how the president and lawmakers solemnly paid their respects to the revolutionaries that gave their lives for the country's democracy.
President Park Geunhye marked the 56th anniversary of the nation's democratic movement at 8 a.m. Tuesday morning by laying flowers at the April 19th National Cemetery in northern Seoul. The leaders of Korea's main political parties also commemorated the occasion at ceremonies later in the day. The ruling Saenuri Party's interim leader Won Yu-chul, the interim leader of the main opposition Minju Party of Korea, Kim Jong-in, and the leader of the minor liberal Justice Party all attended a ceremony at the National Cemetery held later on Tuesday morning. The co-leader of the centrist People's Party, An Chol-soo, paid tribute at a memorial in Democracy Park in southern port city of Busan. All four parties also issued special comments, praising the democracy legacy of the movement and vowing to carry on the spirit of those who led it. But the focus of the statements varied based on the parties' political positions. In its statement, the conservative Saenuri Party honored the sacrifices made a half-century ago and vowed to protect and preserve the freedoms, both democratic and economic, achieved through the movement. The main opposition Minju Party of Korea said the democratic uprising showed the nation's sovereignty lies in the hands of the people. And in a reflection of the recent election, the party called on the presidential office to take a more open and conciliatory stance in its administration of state affairs. The centrist People's Party, meanwhile, criticized the current state of democracy in the country, saying it is going backward instead of progressing. It vowed to restore the democratic gains the activists of 56 years ago fought so hard to bestow on the country. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Park Geunhye stressed that labor reform is the key to improving overall economic sentiment, continuing with her push for reform drives. Speaking to the national team that won the International Olympics for the 7th time at a luncheon meeting, President Park said labor reforms will provide fair rewards and equal opportunities to all workers, including the disabled, as reforms will make the labor market more flexible. She also pledged to create more jobs customized for people with disabilities. The event took place a day ahead of Korea's Day of Persons with Disabilities, which falls on April 20th. Korea's central bank has cut the country's growth outlook for this year to below 3%. Despite the trim that further stokes concerns of Korea falling into a low-growth trap, the central bank left its interest rate unchanged at 1.5% for the 10th straight month. Hwang Jae looks beyond the numbers.
The Bank of Korea expects the country's economy to expand 2.8% this year. That's a trim from its earlier projection of 3% and signals Korea may fail to grow in the 3% range for a second straight year. After the central bank's monthly monetary policy meeting on Tuesday, BOK Governor Lee Ju-yeol explained worse than expected first quarter figures prompted by sagging global demand led to the downgrade. While the new forecast fuels concerns about Korea's feeble recovery momentum, the central bank remained cautious in maneuvering the key rate, leaving it steady at a record low of 1.5%.
There are limitations in boosting the economy just through monetary policy, because the current ailing conditions are mainly due to structural issues, not cyclical factors. So monetary policy can be effective when carried out with fiscal policies and structural reforms. The board is adamant on this.
The top central banker added, although the bank does have more room to cut its rate further, current levels are accommodative enough to support the country's growth pace. The BOK projects the Korean economy will show signs of a gradual pickup this quarter on the back of improving domestic demand. Still, market expectations linger for a trim later this year as Korea faces paltry global demand, especially from China.
With the lowered revision, we think their stance of further easing in the second half of the year actually it stays the same. We continue to believe the fiscal policy, the supplementary budget will be drawn in the later of this year and the 2 rate cuts in the second half of the year as well.
So while the BOK kept a wait-and-see approach this month, raising questions about the effectiveness of a rate trim, analysts say if second quarter figures do not improve as expected, there will be little room for the central bank to wiggle out of easing pressure. Park Geunhye, Arirang News.
Top diplomats from South Korea, the U.S. and Japan wrapped up a round of trilateral talks in Seoul, focusing on how to proceed with measures against North Korea's ongoing provocations, especially amid growing signs that Pyongyang could conduct a fifth nuclear test soon. After the talks, Seoul's Vice Foreign Minister Im Sung-nam and his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Tony Blinken and Akitaka Saiki met with Seoul's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se. Yoon said he hopes that the tripartite collaboration will send a strong message to the regime in other parts of the world and expressed hope the meeting would become a regular event, considering the common challenges they face at this difficult time.
Japan, the U.S.
The UN Security Council has expanded the list of sanctions on North Korea to include more items that could be used to develop weapons of mass destruction. This comes after reports that the Sri Lankan government confiscated tens of thousands of dollars in cash from 2 North Koreans traveling through the country last month. Kwon Jang-ho has the latest.
Maraging steel, flow-forming machines, and laser welding equipment. These are some of the new items that have been added to the UN Security Council's embargoes list concerning North Korea. Most of these items are associated with the development of nuclear weapons and missiles. For example, maraging steel is a type of reinforced steel that is used for the fuselage of planes and reportedly used on North Korean missiles. Flow-forming machines are key pieces of equipment in the production of nuclear centrifuges. A list of 14 chemicals that could be used in the production of chemical weapons has also been added to the list. These additions were added to the UN Security Council resolution that came into force at the beginning of March in response to North Korea's nuclear test and long-range missile launch earlier in the year. It also emerged on Tuesday that authorities in Sri Lanka stopped 2 North Koreans carrying $168,000 in a bag while transferring through an airport in the capital, Colombo. According to South Korea's Yonhap news agency, they were stopped on March 14th and they were traveling from Oman to Beijing. It's the first time North Koreans have been caught moving cash since the UN sanctions blocked the regime carrying out all financial transactions with other countries. The men said they were carrying wages for their colleagues who had been working in Oman. The money was confiscated and the men were fined roughly $700. The North Korean government has demanded the money to be returned, while the men are still believed to be held at a hotel near the airport. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Korea's land is crisscrossed by a vast number of rivers and streams, making it essential for the country's military to conduct regular river crossing exercises, which involves setting up temporary bridges. But we can skip that part when you have tanks that can tackle such obstacles without such aids with ease. Kim Hyun-bin introduces us to Korea's very own K-2 tanks.
Boasting a maximum speed of 70 kilometers per hour, Korea's K-2 tanks take over the road one by one, displaying the country's infantry prowess. Before infiltrating into the enemy's territory, the K-2s release smoke to camouflage themselves from the enemy's view. Friendly troops cross first, and the K-2s follow behind and cross the river, securing the premises. This is a river crossing military exercise that featured 10 K-200 armored vehicles and 30 K-2 tanks. And the highlight of the drill was witnessing the K-2 units cross the river without the need of a temporary bridge, as a tank can submerge into rivers up to 4 meters deep.
Most of the Korea's rivers are 4 meters in depth, so the K-2 can cross most rivers on the peninsula to tackle the enemy covertly.
The K-2 predecessor, the K-1A1, also an amphibian infantry unit, required up to 4 hours to go underwater, and it was limited to depths of up to 2 meters. However, the K-2 can not only reach depths twice as much, but also at a fraction of the time, as it only requires 30 minutes for the tank to submerge, making the K-2 more suitable in times of crisis, where every second counts. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Turning to the latest from the disaster-reeling countries, Japan and Ecuador, they are both struggling to cope with the aftermath of devastating earthquakes that have claimed 45 lives in Japan and 413 lives in Ecuador and wiped out property in both countries. Yi and-shin give us the latest updates.
The past few days have been disastrous for Japan and Ecuador after the two countries, an ocean apart, suffered massive earthquakes over the weekend. Both countries are located in the area around the edge of the Pacific Ocean known as the Ring of Fire, where about 90% of the Earth's seismic activities occur. And in both nations, rescue workers are racing against time to find survivors. In Japan, a coalition of national military, police, and firefighting forces was dispatched to the area before the 72-hour golden window to find survivors, closed at 1 a.m. on Tuesday morning. One woman is holding out hope that a neighbor could be found.
I really hope she's alive. If she's there, I hope she's just stuck in an air pocket somewhere.
In response to the tragedies, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said the number of troops helping with the rescue effort had risen to 25,000, and the U.S. military would provide air transportation to the affected area. In Ecuador, the full extent of the damage from Saturday's massive earthquake is becoming more apparent as rescue teams enter isolated inland areas. Rescue crews are still searching for survivors, but the chances of finding people alive have narrowed as rescue efforts enter their third day on Tuesday.
In our previous search and rescue work, we had pulled 7 dead bodies from there, but we never lost hope of finding someone alive.
Ecuador's president, who toured the damaged areas on Monday, said the government is trying its best to provide water and restore power. He said the cost of reconstruction will run into the billions of dollars. International aid has been pouring into the country from sources including the Spanish Red Cross and the United Nations Refugee Agency. The European Union has also provided 1 million euros to support the country. Yi and-shin, Arirang News.
Our hearts and prayers go out to the victims and their families in Ecuador and Japan. And now turning over to the U.S. presidential race, which is building up a head of steam on the eve of a crucial pair of primaries in New York. If Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton score big in the Big Apple, the two frontrunners could find themselves within touching distance of their respective nominations. Kim Mo-gyun has the updates on the race for the White House.
A total of 291 Democratic and 95 Republican delegates are up for grabs in the New York primaries. According to the Associated Press, as of Monday, Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton is leading with 1,758 delegates to Bernie Sanders' 1,076. The Republican frontrunner Donald Trump has 744 delegates, while his closest rival Ted Cruz has 559. The magic number of delegates for the Democratic nominee is 2,383. For the Republicans, it is 1,237. Monday is the last official day of campaigning for the primaries. The candidates have been continuing efforts to sway the minds of undecided voters around New York. Clinton met her supporters in Queens earlier in the day and urged them to participate in Tuesday's vote. Bernie Sanders has been throwing a concert in a park set against the backdrop of Manhattan's skyscrapers. Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner, has been holding a rally in Buffalo, a Rust Belt city recovering from economic decline.
Ted Cruz has been campaigning across various parts of the Big Apple, while the other GOP candidate in the race, John Kasich, has been stumping in Syracuse and Schenectady, two upstate cities. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
These are the stories we're following at this hour. We'll have more updates coming your way at 10 p.m. Korea time with Moon Geun-young's News Center, so do join us then. For now, thank you for watching.